Good morning.
Hey, Jake, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. So the big thing in my life this week was I got Monday and Tuesday off work, and as I've increasingly approached 40, gotten into cooking. I feel like you have to as a man of a certain age, you have to adapt some kind of solitary hobby to fill the void, bore your kids into being possibly interested in what you're doing so they'll leave you alone. So one of the things that I'm doing is cooking. And so I took my day off and baked a chicken pot pie. So let me tell you about the hardest part about making a chicken pot pie is the crust. You want to make sure that you have butter evenly distributed throughout the dough so you get a flaky crust, but you don't want it to be worked in or else you're just making a shortbread. So I feel like I mostly hit the mark with the chicken pot pie, but it's a work in progress. So I was pretty proud of that.
Good for you.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't. If we're doing small talk, careful listeners of the show will know I've been ripping through Ken Burns on Vietnam. Last week I was at the Gulf of Tonkin, and I'm pleased to announce that the Vietnam War has now ended. I'm on to the final episode. Really looking forward to this weekend.
Did it get into public sentiment? I mean, I'm sure it did. It's a documentary, but how much did it talk about that?
A lot. A ton. I mean, just candidly, I had no idea Jane Fonda going to sit on a tank in North Vietnam. And some of these things I know, but just seeing the protests, seeing the way some of these anti-war protesters treated veterans, it's phenomenal series. Could not recommend it more.
Do you think the Vietnam War would be popular today, or do you think it would be as unpopular as it was back then?
I think, and this is beyond the scope of this podcast, but what's happening in Venezuela is just this really interesting. We're just striking these boats. We're not getting very seemingly honest communications from the government about why we're doing this and what exactly we're doing and who these people are that are being killed in the name of the United States. And I don't know. I don't really even want to think about it. It was gruesome.
I just know from following the coverage of the Kent State University shootings, which happened around that time, that at the time they were somewhat popular. People kind of thought they got what they deserved and that kind of thing.
Americans sided with the soldiers.
Yeah, and in retrospect, it's seen as this massacre, and it's kind of a dark time in history. So, I'm always interested in the real time versus the retrospective look and stuff like that. But kind of to dive into one more subject before we kind of get to the main business of this. So Vice President J.D. Vance was asked on stage recently whether he could name the 8 presidents who were born in Ohio, the 8 U.S. presidents, and he named 2. So I'm just curious, Jake, you're not a native Ohioan, but you've been here for a while. You went to a university with the word Ohio in it. How many presidents from Ohio can you name?
Okay, Warren Harding would be the easy one. Grover Cleveland is the false positive.
Yeah.
Not
right.
Grover Cleveland. Oh, man, I'm getting embarrassed on the air right now.
So Vance missed a big one for a Cincinnati guy.
Taft.
Okay, yeah.
Taft. Oh, give me some more hints.
So Rutherford B. Hayes is weirdly well known to Ohioans, and I think a lot of it is because there was a Daily Show segment in the 2000s about how his birthplace was demolished to build a BP gas station. So if you ever want to come pump gas, you can think about Rutherford B. Hayes while you do it if you go to Delaware.
No offense to President Hayes, but I was never going to come up with that name.
And then Vance got another one that is a pretty big, famous Ohioan. So this guy was a military leader, had a little bit of a drinking problem.
Grant?
Yeah, you got it.
Nice.
So
I got drinking problem. I did not get the Ohio tie.
Yeah, there are more. William McKinley's one, but I'm only going to cut off there in case I name William Henry Harrison. Pretty sure he's from Ohio, but I know some overlap with Eastern Indiana. So.
29 days of his presidency.
Yeah, but yeah, I just the Cincinnati Enquirer, which wrote or maybe it was the USA Today. It's hard to tell the difference with them, but kind of wrote about it, and they really ragged on Vance for not knowing Taft, given that I think he might live on William Howard Taft Drive or something like that. So anyway. I thought that was pretty funny, but I think you did a respectable job considering that you didn't prepare for that. All right, well, so anyways, I'm Andrew Tobias.
I'm Jake Zuckerman.
And this is Signal Flares from Capitol Square. I'm going to say it's America's only source for Ohio political news. Do you think is that defensible for me to say that?
America's only source for political, yeah.
Yeah,
we have the monopoly on journalism in America.
Yeah, so we have 4 topics that we're going to discuss today. So first off, do we care about the opinion of an 80-year-old man when it comes to who we're going to vote for governor next year? I submit yes. But, we can discuss that. We have the burning question of, can we still get high at bars by drinking something in a can? Maybe. We're going to address whether our power bill may go down because of something the U.S. Supreme Court did. I think the answer is no.
It's yes.
Oh, and then there you go. And finally, is there really no way to stop Ohio politicians from using their campaign funds to pay for their criminal defense. I guess we'll have the questions to all of these, or the answers to all these questions and more as we kind of
They
proceed.
say journalism is dead, and we just threw 4 question headlines at you,
I
dear
know.
listeners.
Yeah. And so we'll just start off. Let's start with that 80-year-old man.
Yeah, well, like much of American politics, our very fates depend on the whims of 80-year-old men. So who made this endorsement? Who'd they endorse?
So we were just talking about William Howard Taft. I'm pretty sure his grandson is Bob Taft, who was the governor of Ohio from circa 1999 to circa 2006. I always forget exactly where the elections pertain to, like when they actually served in office. But anyways, he this week endorsed Vivek Ramaswamy for governor. And so one might think, yeah, a Republican endorsing another Republican, who cares? Endorsements really aren't that important, I think, generally for the most part anyways. But what stood out to me about this one is that Taft is an old school Republican. There was a time when Democrats, like Republicans, have done really well in state elections, largely kind of, now obviously Republicans run everything. Democrats had an advantage as that trend started to kind of develop in the legislature, and then that kind of gave way. But Republicans, anyways, always have done really well for statewide office for the most part in the modern time. And Taft was kind of like the end era when Democrats and Republicans really kind of or when Ohio was a more competitive state. So anyways, what interested me about this was that Taft, as Trump has emerged and also kind of ironically helped move Ohio into like a quasi-permanent red state, at least as long as I think Trump is on the scene, Taft has drifted away from the Republican Party. He went so far as to endorse Sherrod Brown in the Senate race last year, who's obviously a Democrat. And ironically, Taft defeated Sherrod Brown in 1990 by arguing he was grossly unfit for office. So like how times change. But Taft also in 2023 came out against issue 1. And so there were 2 issue 1s. The first one would have made it harder to amend the Constitution. The second issue 1 would have enshrined abortion rights in the Constitution. So it was like a way that Republicans tried to prevent that from happening by changing the rules. And so Taft is this guy who has he's not a Democrat, but he's a holdout Republican who's kind of part of the old political establishment, who does not like Donald Trump, who doesn't just give his endorsement to Republicans because he wants to. And in this case, he endorsed Vivek Ramaswamy, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
But what does it mean?
So the first thing is that I think really what it matters, it's not that Bob Taft commands votes and that people checked, in the box, did Bob Taft vote for this guy or not? Okay, yeah, sign me up. I think more so that besides just being interesting for people who care about Ohio politics just inherently, I think it kind of says more about who Vivek Ramaswamy is than it does really about Bob Taft. So I think that Ramaswamy has kind of molded himself as this MAGA populist Republican, and maybe there are ways that that's true. I think a lot of it have to do with who he communicates. But if you kind of pay attention to what Ramaswamy is running on, it's deregulating businesses, it's cutting taxes, and these are the things that the Republican Party was about pretty much in modern times, maybe dating back to Robert Taft in the 1950s, the senator, Bob Taft's uncle or dad, I'm not sure which one. So, but Donald Trump has kind of changed the Republican Party's emphasis when it comes to what kinds of things they care about. And I think that Ramaswamy in some ways might be kind of a reset back to the old school Republican Party, just kind of in a new, package or something like that. So whether or not that's true, I just think it's interesting that, one might think that because he emerged on the scene in this Trump era, that he'd be like a Trump clone. But people like Bob Taft don't see it that way. And I thought that was kind of interesting. It might give us insight into what kind of politician Vivek Ramaswamy is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're describing him like this old guard Republican, but Vivek is very much in this Donald Trump MAGA orbit, cast of characters, cinematic universe. I guess how does he fit in that world? Am I right to kind of place him in that set?
I think it's more about communication, really. They talk about the same kinds of issues. I see Vivek Ramaswamy and other modern Republican politicians kind of basically look to see what pops on social media and then jump in and then weigh in on that thing and largely talk about it in the same way that others do. And I think Trump kind of seeded the ground for that ecosystem to exist, although it kind of existed before him in the form of Fox News and things like that. So I think it's hard to kind of distinguish them, but I do kind of dial in when there are kind of differences in what they need to do. And so another example that I've highlighted in my reporting in the past is after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, you had Trump kind of come out and others say, we need to punish the Democrats. Like there's a famous moment at Charlie Kirk's funeral where his widow had talked about forgiving the guy who police say shot and killed Charlie Kirk. And Trump said, I don't want to forgive them. Like, I hate them. And Vivek came out, spoke publicly about the need to persuade liberals not to like imprison them or whatever the most extreme thing that you can possibly think of, which you kind of heard versions of that on the right. So I think I look for things like this when they happen to, I think, highlight ways that it's really easy for our national politics to flatten out every actor in the political system to basically either being a carbon copy of the leader of the Republican Party or a carbon copy of whoever the leader of the Democratic Party is right now. That's actually kind of harder to say. And so things like this, I think, help bring texture and help understand kind of who these people are. And especially with Ramaswamy, somebody who has a very good chance of being the next governor, I think it's just there's just a high level of value I place in kind of trying to help people understand better who he is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As a veteran of practicing journalism in 2017 and reading about many so-called mini Trumps, I can understand what you're talking about. But we have another topic.
Yeah,
it's a little chiller.
Yeah, this is one that you're going to have to really like do the heavy lifting on. But the U.S. Supreme Court did something about electricity rates or something like that, right?
Oh, we're talking about different. This one's less chill. I think this is less chill. I thought we were doing marijuana, but that's fine. We can do energy
Let's
policy.
warm up with this first.
Okay.
The chaser will be hemp, intoxicating hemp.
Sorry, potheads. We're doing energy policy. The U.S. Supreme Court this week declined to hear a case, which is letting stand a ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which upheld an order from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What does any of that mean? Basically, the FERC, as it's known, put out this opinion. There's something, these aren't always itemized on your bills, but they're a piece of your energy bills called the RTO adder, with the idea being that this is how the 13-state grid system that we're a part of incentivizes utilities to join the grid, to plug into the grid, to put their power into the grid, to distribute energy through this interstate transmission grid. Except the kicker is it's billed as an incentive. Customers pay for the incentive. State law requires utilities to join the grid. So the federal government considers this an incentive and says utilities can charge customers for this incentive in order for doing this thing that we want them to do. But Ohio law says it's not a thing we want them to do. It's a thing they must do by law. So the FERC said, wait a minute. Why on earth are you charging customers for this incentive if you're required to do it by law? That's not an incentive. You may not do that. The Sixth Circuit actually expanded it and said no utilities in Ohio can do this. So statewide, any electric customer in Ohio is either going to avoid a charge in the future, or in the case of Duke customers around Cincinnati, or First Energy customers around Toledo, Akron, Cleveland, almost the whole northern part of the state, are in for a refund. The total value of this charge through 2031 was about $400 million. So the reality is on your energy bill, it's going to be a very modest difference. It could be measured probably less than $2, just back of the napkin math. But it comes to a pretty significant wealth transfer. This is $400 million that is staying in the pockets of Ohioans and not going to these investor-owned utilities.
Yeah, so backing up a little bit. So basically you're saying that the grid has an incentive to get companies like First Energy to join. First Energy has to do it, but they still charge customers anyways. And then somebody sued over that. Is that kind of what started this?
Exactly. Yeah. You want your utilities on the grid. We want the grid to be huge. So if there's a ton of energy needed over there, well, we got plenty over here. We don't need that much. These things work better with scale. And I think that's the thinking behind the incentives and why Ohio passed a law saying this need not be incentivized. This is a must. And these utilities were still trying to seek these incentives.
So did the U.S. Supreme Court uphold the appellate court ruling, or what I'm trying to understand, like the most recent thing that actually happened?
So they didn't issue a ruling. They didn't per se uphold the case. But what they did is they looked at what the Sixth Circuit did. They looked at what the utilities are saying the Sixth Circuit did wrong. And they said, nah, there's no meat to this. We're going to let the Sixth Circuit's opinion stand.
So how much money can people expect to get back?
Oh, that's going to depend on a ruling from the FERC for customers of Duke and First Energy, for customers of AES Ohio around Dayton, or American Electric Power around Central Ohio, Southeast Ohio. It's nothing. It's just it's an upcharge that you will avoid in the future.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to say about that before we chill out a little bit more?
Nice win for ratepayers. That's all.
So the next topic we're going to discuss is intoxicating hemp, everybody's favorite beverage. Who doesn't enjoy sitting down with a nice cold intoxicating hemp beverage, right? Isn't that what all the kids are calling it?
And calling it intoxicating hemp, just unbelievable.
As an aside, maybe we'll talk more about gambling later on, but like I remember maybe 10 years ago, Ohio legalized slot machines at racetracks. Basically, like our state constitution limits how gambling is supposed to occur and where it can occur, and so you have these legal fictions that kind of emanate from like, oh, this isn't gambling. This is, we're limited in gambling, but we're not limited in the lottery. So these are they call them video lottery terminals, and I remember writing slot machines and being corrected that they were video lottery terminals. And so anyways, like these weird legal, if there's a weird legal jargon like this, it's because of some very specific reason. I just think it's stupid.
Legal fiction is a good word. I mean, I don't want to start casting aspersions around, but you got to understand if we're talking about pot, marijuana, the hippie stuff, that's coming from the cannabis plant. If we are talking about intoxicating hemp, that comes from the cannabis plant. If you smoke intoxicating hemp or you smoke marijuana, you get high. I don't know. Maybe there's a difference. I haven't gone Pepsi challenge here, but I just think there's a little bit of a dubious distinction between the two that gets played up in legal and political context.
All right. Well, we may or may not bring that up again in the future because it's kind of like a pet peeve. But we've been talking about the subject recently. Ohio, maybe last month, passed a bill that would regulate intoxicating hemp, quote unquote. And it's before the Senate. It seemed like we're getting pretty close to some kind of compromise in deciding what the future of this stuff is going to be. And then what happened this week? There was a big thing.
Yeah, well, the longest shutdown in U.S. history ended, and out of the Senate came this, I would call it, wholly unrelated amendment to the bill that reopens the federal government that closes a loophole that opened in 2018. That was sort of one of the big steps toward the liberalization of marijuana in America. We can spare the details, but the gist is this closes the 0.3% THC loophole that allows intoxicating hemp to sell this marijuana-adjacent product, unregulated product. It's sold in gas stations. You don't need to be 21 to buy it. So there's sort of been this alt marijuana market that has been totally unregulated in the U.S., and the Senate closed that loophole, and I believe Trump signed the bill.
I am not 100% sure, but I believe the House passed it, and this is basically it's happening.
It's on its way.
Yeah.
Yes, it's on its way. So this is going to happen. So any Ohio lawmaker who has spent the last 16 months in furious negotiations over the fate of the hemp industry in Ohio, I don't want to say that's all up in smoke. Ha 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 ha. But clearly, all negotiations have been severely complicated and in some ways constrained by what the federal government did.
Yeah, so the ban doesn't take effect until the end of next year. So it's not like totally pulling the rug out from under the industry immediately. But what's not clear to me at all is basically we were expecting the Senate in the House in Ohio to agree on something by Thanksgiving. And it was kind of like the main event for like this waning days of this current legislative period of session that's happening. I have no idea what they're going to do now. Matt Huffman was asked about this, the Ohio House Speaker, on Wednesday, and he said a lot of words. I'm not sure what his actual meaning was from it. He did say something along the lines of how they don't want to set up a complex regulatory scheme that the federal government is just going to declare to be illegal. On the other hand, Ohio's already done that by the issue 2, which voters approved in 2023, which led to recreational marijuana being legalized. And I don't know, probably helping seed the ground for this like off-brand marijuana intoxicating hemp stuff that we're talking about too. So this is one of those things that I have no idea how this is going to play into the whole thing. If I had to guess, they're probably just going to do it anyways, because that's kind of what they did for recreational marijuana in the first place. But there are too many uncertainties for me right now to really know how this one's going to play out. But just another weird twist and turn in the, first long developing and then recently kind of suddenly developing, picture of legalizing and liberalizing marijuana laws.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, something I'm curious about is a lot, marijuana illegal federally, legal on the state level, but the federal government usually loads up appropriation bills with language to the effect of you cannot use any money that we're giving or any money that you're deriving from taxpayers to prosecute marijuana crimes in states that have legalized it. So that sort of gives this sort of legal cover for states to operate. So are we going to do that with hemp? Is there going to be this legal cover for hemp? Are we not going to do that? And also there's this philosophical issue of why do we have laws if we're just going to say, oh, like, we have all these laws, all these things you can't do, but you can kind of do them. So I don't know how you square that circle.
I don't know how, like, people from the outside trying to, like, I like to think about America as like the way that a tourist might view it. I read, this is really nerdy of me, but I read the English version of Wiki Travel about the United States, and it's written for English speakers from around the world. And it's like, oh yeah, like there's weirdly a lot of ice in America that you can get in your drinks. Like make sure you ask not to get the ice if you don't want it. Like stuff that you wouldn't think of as an American. I just think it's kind of fun. How would somebody view this if you were to say, yeah, marijuana is federally illegal. Some places allow it. Sometimes you can buy it in a gas station if you're, 15 years old. They just passed a law banning that. Like, how would you explain that to somebody?
Well, say it's like someone's coming from Japan who likes to smoke pot, and he's like, hey, I'm from Japan. Like, can you please explain to me the legal status of marijuana in the U.S.?
Yeah.
I mean, be like, well, it's illegal in the U.S.
Yeah. How long do you have? Like, that's what I would answer that question for that Japanese tourist.
And also, you could say things like, well, it's illegal to smoke it in public here in Ohio, even if it is legal in the state. But you walk around the street and it smells like somebody just smoked a joint, like all the time. And I'm sorry, Japanese pot smoker. I can't give you a concise answer.
Yeah, good luck. I mean, the last thing I'll say is that I'm just not a policy expert on this. I'm pretty sure it's the federal hemp loophole that is why you're allowed to buy some of these products with a credit card because of the banking system. I wonder if the banking system is going to pull back from this. But on the other hand, it takes effect at the end of 2026, which, by the way, is an election year. So I think there's going to be a little bit of lobbying federally between now and then, don't you think?
Yes, there will.
And maybe it will become, this knowledge will just be completely useless, and we'll have all talked about it for nothing at all. So
story for another day. What's our last topic here? What do we got?
We've got a couple more. Do you want to talk about Larry Householder?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm a little less familiar. I think our readers know Larry Householder by now. Our listeners know Larry Householder. The very, very TLDR. He was accused of taking a, quote, $60 million bribe by the U.S. Department of Justice, and he has been tried, convicted. He's in jail for 20 years. The CEO accused of paying the bribe is awaiting trial in January. He has pleaded not guilty. All that said, that's like 6 years of history packed into a quick paragraph. What has the Ohio Elections Commission been doing about Larry Householder, who I will emphasize here, quote, what federal prosecutors did was the biggest bribery scandal in state history, entirely dependent on the use of campaign finance dollars?
Yeah, you set the stage really well there. So shortly after Larry Householder was arrested, he required criminal defense. Criminal defense is very expensive. And that's why often when people face federal charges, they just plead guilty. And, for better or for worse, that's the way the system often works. People can't afford to fight the government, and so they just kind of like try to cut a deal. Householder, in looking for money to help him fight the government, probably thought, hey, I've got $1 million in my campaign fund. And that campaign fund, all politicians have campaign funds, and they obviously use them to run their political campaigns. But if you're a legislative leader, you're raising money on behalf of everybody in your caucus. So this is the Ohio House Republican Fund, essentially, that he controlled. And he spent $900,000 from that campaign fund hiring his lawyers. He got a great criminal defense, or at least, he paid for one. And the weird thing is that Ohio law says you can't do that. Campaign funds are only allowed to be used for campaigns. We've actually discussed this before on the show, but the idea is that, I think the really simple way to understand it is that a politician can't go into his campaign fund, take it to Vegas, and play the slots or the video lottery terminals if you were to do it in Ohio. But there are other things like, what is a personal expense? And the Ohio Elections Commission in the past has said that politicians can't hire lawyers to defend themselves with their campaign funds against criminal charges, and that is exactly what Larry Householder did. That was 5 years ago. There is an active Ohio Elections Commission case still ongoing, which was filed by State Attorney General Dave Yost against Householder, saying WTF, why did you do this? And the reason why there are other things too that go into it, but I think that's the one that it's like the law says you can't do it. He did it. And he's paid for his defense. He lost his case. He's in prison, and the state procedure to continue to kind of enforce this is just still languishing. So the actual news, I'm sorry, we should probably in the future do better kind of kicking off with the news eventually, or at the start. But the Ohio Elections Commission had a hearing last week, and they decided to punt again on whether to act on this. And actually, the commission director has recommended dropping the case because it's been so long that the statute of limitations has passed, which refers to how much time basically prosecutors have to convict somebody or charge them after something happens that's illegal, before they no longer can. So I think the whole thing is pretty ridiculous.
Wait, let me run this back.
Yeah.
Larry Householder gets accused of a crime.
Yep.
Larry Householder uses $900,000 from his campaign fund to pay for his criminal defense lawyers.
Yes.
The law says you may not use your campaign account to pay for your criminal defense lawyers.
Yes.
This was all detected, accused in summer of 2020.
Yes.
It is now November of 2025.
Yes.
Nothing has been done, and now they're dropping the case because so much time has passed.
Yes. Yeah. The Ohio Elections Commission is responsible for enforcing campaign law. And the way it works is that they hear it, they make some kind of determination about it, and then they make a referral to prosecutors. When this first hit, the director of the Elections Commission said, we can't confirm what this money was used for because we can't interview Larry Householder and ask him about it. Larry Householder, it's a quasi-criminal proceeding, so I don't know if he asserted his Fifth Amendment. Is it the Fifth Amendment? Am I getting the right amendment? I
You got the right amendment.
Yeah. But it got kind of stuck behind that. They said that they were stuck behind the federal prosecution generally. The prosecutors may have asked them to stand down while they proceeded their case. So whatever. I mean, it's been years. These criminal proceedings complicated it. Yost actually filed his own criminal complaint, including this stuff. That's still pending. But yeah, so like I said, I think the whole thing shows how pretty much weak campaign finance enforcement is in Ohio. It's this confusing process. It's not clear. Is it going to be the state prosecution that kind of enforces it? Is it the Elections Commission that's supposed to enforce it? Individual people, like the officials in this process, kind of blame each other, or in the Elections Commission's case, they say that they blame the prosecution, but like ultimately nothing has happened. I think that's the bottom line. And so nothing happened again this week. And I think sometimes too that journalists, like, we don't do a good job at writing about things that don't happen. We only write about the things that do happen. So if things are omitted that are important, sometimes people just never hear about them again. So I try to like continue to write about this topic when I can, because I think it's important to just emphasize how silly this whole process is. And if the law is going to say you can't do something, but there's no way to actually stop or punish somebody for doing it, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm. I would steal a line here from Franklin County Auditor Michael Stinziano, former lawmaker, who once told me it is the position of the legislature that all things are legal until a judge says they are illegal. I.e., if there is no enforcement of politicians, they are not going to read the Constitution and say, you know what, the thing I'm trying to do probably contradicts this Constitution. You need enforcement, and it is not coming from the Ohio Elections Commission, at least in this case.
Well, it turns out the Ohio Elections Commission is going to cease to exist by the end of the year. The legislature voted to abolish it. I think stuff like this, frankly, plays like a major role in that. So we'll see whether or not that change results in better enforcement when these kinds of things pop up in the future.
That change was brought by people dragged through years of this stuff at the Elections Commission to be charged less than $100 in fines. I mean, I can understand their frustration. Do we have more topics?
Yeah, we got one more.
What do we got?
Betting and baseball.
Oh, baseball.
This is a little lighthearted. We axed this from the banter section and threw it into like the nitty-gritty policy section, but it could go either way.
Here we go. Well, we've had some indictments flying around sports betting world. I don't think we need to rehash those here, but what is going on? What are these indictments doing to sports betting in Ohio?
So last weekend, a couple of Cleveland Guardians pitchers were indicted and arrested, or maybe it's 2 weeks ago, I forget. Actually, one of them finally got arrested.
There are so many sports betting indictments, it is hard to keep track of who has been accused of what crimes when.
Yeah, but when this scandal emerged over the summer, Governor Mike DeWine called on Major League Baseball to ban prop bets, which are like, I'm not betting on the outcome of the game. I'm not even betting on how many statistics a player will accrue during the course of the game. I am literally betting on what the next pitch is going to be, and that's what this particular scandal pertained to, and that's what prosecutors say, that basically these two pitchers were bribed to throw these bets in favor of people who had inside knowledge about what's going to happen. So the development that we're talking about is that Major League Baseball, possibly because of prodding by Mike DeWine, possibly independently, has decided to they were considering, and DeWine wanted them to ban these kinds of like micro prop bets, but baseball decided and announced that they were going to instead limit them to $200. So in the case of this scandal, I don't know what the initial bet amount was, but like we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars that gamblers won by knowing which pitcher was going to throw what pitch at a given moment. So
Can I clarify something here?
Yeah.
We're not talking about a pitcher, to throw, I don't know, less than this many runs. We're talking about the outcome of specific pitches here,
will this
right?
pitch be a ball? Will it be
Yeah.
more or less than this many miles per hour at this particular moment?
I just want to. So we're talking about hyper specific.
And this is this is on the level of like at the Super Bowl, what color is the Gatorade going to be they dump on the coach? Only it's not as fun.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so I guess so baseball believes that by limiting the amount of the bet, it still, I guess, like keeps this market in place for degenerate gamblers who want to do that kind of thing, but limits like the pure corruption that's would result from like the $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 payoff that somebody might get from having inside knowledge about this. So what do you think about that? Will this actually stop corruption scandals from happening if the bet number is limited like that?
Well, for one, I'm not a policymaker. It's not my job necessarily to envision these things. I did not envision the 5 families of New York mafia fame being involved in sports betting. I didn't see the problems with these hyper-specific prop bets, and I do. I mean, you can see how it's for a pitcher. It's almost no skin off your back. Yeah, I'm going to throw like one ball at this one random 4th inning pitch, and it'll have no effect on my stat sheet. I can still play a winning game. Just got to remember that one pitch.
Yeah, it's not like point shaving where you're screwing over your teammates or something like that too, right? So
yeah, but the thing that sticks out to me is weird, and I do take note that there were Cleveland Guardians indicted in the scandal, so that's an Ohio-specific tie, but football season is still raging. You could see how this same dynamic could play out for a quarterback to throw an interception or throw an incomplete pass and, down 4, whatever. And basketball, where there have been indictments, is still going on. You could still see these same problems. I find it very strange that Ohio would focus on the sport whose gambling season just ended, as opposed to sports who I think most money is going to be bet from here forward in football and basketball. So
yeah, we haven't seen these kinds of scandals yet in football. Am I forgetting them? It's all been basketball and baseball so far, right? Like it's in the current kind of like
I think the operative word is yet.
Yeah, so maybe like betting is these kinds of things are less likely to happen in football because I think that if you are throwing plays in football, you're going to get hurt. But I think it'd be super easy for a receiver just like drop a pass or something like that.
Or
so
how about someone who has inside information that a wide receiver is dealing with an injury that hasn't been reported,
Right.
or is going to sit out the second half, and you could manipulate that you could still have the same quote unquote insider trading problem, to quote the FBI director, that you have in basketball. That's what I'm hung up on.
Yeah, so kind of like to tie this back to actual policy in Ohio, me and other reporters asked Matt Huffman, who's the House Speaker, about this week. Is more action necessary to kind of help, prevent this kind of thing from happening in other sports? Huffman gave a big, like, this is a problem. I didn't think this was going to be good. I was right kind of like speech. He said that it's, legislative study is necessary, but he didn't have any proposals. He didn't have like a timeline. So I think it's just kind of like in the somebody should do something about that phase. We'll see whether or not that actually turns into somebody doing something about it.
And to that effect, if I may break a little bit of news on this podcast,
Whoa.
I have an email from Assistant General Counsel Emily Berner of the Ohio Casino Control Commission, which regulates sports betting in Ohio. I asked to see, can I see the filings? Can I see, and we gave the league's power to change these rules unilaterally. I said, can you send me what the MLB has sent the Casino Control Commission?
Yeah.
The Casino Control Commission, to cut through some legalese, does not have any filings from the MLB. And to quote directly, additionally, the commission works closely with Governor Mike DeWine's office and the General Assembly in serving the citizens of Ohio and protecting the integrity of gaming in the state. To that end, staff is gathering information for the commission to consider. The commission will announce its steps in the upcoming days. That email was sent Monday. Now, I bring that up to say, doesn't seem like anything is moving all that fast here. So we're still talking about baseball, which, again, as I said, the season's over. Boy, are we going to get through all of football and basketball season with no action?
It is way more common for kind of policy changes to happen reacting to some problem than it is to proactively kind of address something that may happen. So, like, this is kind of a way that the world works. So I guess we'll wait until, I'm not going to name a name. Insert favorite football player here, gets arrested and hauled off, and whether that prompts Ohio to do something about this stuff.
Quick correction here. I'm sorry. I was reading an email from August, but pretty similar email from the same woman at the Casino Control Commission, quote, introducing a rule could inadvertently impede other conversations from occurring and potentially stifle that dialogue. The commission will proceed with the rule should it become apparent that regulatory action is necessary. Further, there are still no filings with the commission. So, ironically, The incorrect email I read from several months ago is still operating policy at the Casino Control Commission.
Yeah, so I mean, like, who knows if this is the right thing to do to stop this stuff? But speaking as a Guardians fan, I don't love that my favorite players or that the players on my favorite team are getting arrested, and I hope that doesn't happen again. And whether state officials, federal officials can do anything about that, I guess we'll see.
That's all I got, Andrew. You got anything?
Yeah, well, like, any fun plans for the weekend?
Oh, God, no. I want to finish Ken Burns. That's like anything this weekend. I'm most looking forward to finishing Ken Burns Vietnam.
That is a real undertaking.
14 hours of footage. I am just rocking through it.
Yeah, and I asked the question. I don't have a good answer, but, I'm just hope to survive and thrive just as I continue to do.
Well, we are surviving and thriving on the Signal Flares podcast. Thank you all for watching. I'm Jake Zuckerman.
I'm Andrew Tobias. Have a great weekend.
Cut. How'd you like that? Stealing the surviving and thriving bit.